one deputy asked him today, was he out of his depth? And I want to just play you back and forth, because he gave a very heartfelt and written speech yesterday on Tuam. But here's the thing that almost came out as an aside from him in Leaders' Questions at midday. There is an unpublished report about the Tuam babies. And under questioning, he said he doesn't know why it's not published. It should be published, but he hasn't read it. And given that this is so serious, given that you're giving such an emotional speech yesterday, given that you're saying you're the person, the Taoiseach, who put this right, Saturday and Sunday, after the Commission said we have found a mass grave, would have seemed like the time that you talk to your Children's Minister and say, what's in that unpublished report, even if you don't read it. This is an exchange between Galway Independent, Catherine Connolly, and Taoiseach Enda Kenny.
Who made it shameful to have what was natural, a pregnancy and a baby? Who made that shameful? Who instituted that those babies were taken, not directly by the nuns in the middle of the night, but as a result of a visit from a priest or someone else doing their job? Please don't insult the women of Ireland on International Women's Day. When is the interim report going to be published?
It's beneath you to take that line, Deputy Connolly. Beneath you to take that line. I see no reason why the report cannot be published. The same as any other report. It may have to be in some redacted form, I don't know. I haven't seen it, I haven't read it. I'm quite sure the Minister will answer for that. But I want you to understand this, Deputy Connolly. I am as committed as anybody else to seeing that we deal with this for once and for all.
And that was Deputy Catherine Connolly, Independent TD for Galway West, addressing Taoiseach Enda Kenny in the Dáil earlier today. And Catherine Connolly joins me now on the line. Catherine, thank you very much for joining us. A very, very strong speech from you in the Dáil today, and indeed very strong questions as well. But the Taoiseach denied your claim that he was insulting women. What did you make of his response?
Well, actually, I'm baffled by his response. I don't doubt his bona fides. Okay, I think he's a well-meaning man, but I use the words out of his depth. He certainly seems to be out of his depth. Perhaps he's overwhelmed with work. But it was a very basic question in relation to the interim report, which Catherine Sapone has referred to in a reply to a Dáil question that I tabled, and indeed that Micheál Martin tabled last November. I tabled it more recently. It was confirmed that there is an interim report, that's with the Minister since September of last year. It is her intention to publish it, but it hasn't been published. And actually, part of the answer was that she wanted to assure the deputies that the government's consideration of this interim report is not affecting progress of the Commission's investigation. So it would seem that different departments are currently looking at the interim report, which the Minister has since last September. It's now almost 9 months later, certainly 8 months later, and no report. Now, my difficulty with that is we need confidence in a system. I listed out a list of investigations that have taken place in Ireland since. You could take any point. I took 1993 as a starting point when the Kilkenny incest investigation was published. And I quoted what Brendan Howland said at the time. Besides being horrified and shocked, in 1993 he said, "It is heartening to read that the investigation team conclude that today, that's 1993, an early diagnosis of such abuse would be much more likely." That was 93. That was followed by Kelly Fitzgerald in 96, more recommendations, what's known as the West of Ireland farmer case in 98, the Monaghan report in 2009, the Roscommon childcare case in 2010, where the Judge Reynolds, said the children had been utterly failed by everyone around them. That's 2010. 2012, we have the Connell Devine case in relation to Grace, the Resilience report in 2015, and in 2016 we have the Conor Dignam report. Now, I'm just picking a selection of reports and a selection of investigations. There have been more. And my question is, why didn't the Minister and the Taoiseach come in today in relation to those reports? I'm swinging between two things, the Tuam babies and the Grace case, and tell us how many recommendations arose from those reports, which ones have been implemented, which ones have not, why not, and what is needed. That's the most basic level of information that a Dáil needs so that we can hold the system to account.
And do you think, Catherine, if that's what we can do or do into the future, do you think that's the key to all of this? I mean, you've listed out a number of different reports, most of which regard incidences or cases of abuse of children and women.
And I'm only listing the reports in relation to the direct contact by the health board, the former health boards, and the health executive. There have been any other amount of reports in relation to institutions. But I mention those because you asked me a question about the interim report in relation to the Tuam mother and baby home. And so there's an interim report here that hasn't been published. Again, an unpublished report creating doubt, creating mistrust amongst people on the ground, survivors and the organisations. Instead of publishing the report immediately, this is what has been discovered, it's only an interim report, we would very much welcome your opinions on this. I know that you have the information on the ground. Instead of that, we have pious platitudes from a Taoiseach that has been given so often. If we take Brendan Howlin in 93, it's now 2017 and we have the Taoiseach using the same pious platitudes, and nobody is saying why haven't we implemented the recommendations. And then on a practical level, in relation to Tuam and the mother and baby home, we need assurance, number one, that the site is going to be sealed off and preserved. We need assurance that all babies will be identified and children. We need the publication of the interim report, and we need to consider extending the terms of reference of the existing commission. Now, there are other practical requests from the organisations on the ground. And again, if we look at what the Minister did last Friday, she made a statement at 11 o'clock. None of the organisations on the ground, none of the survivor organisations were informed. Now, again, I don't doubt the Minister's bona fides, but there's something not quite right in their understanding of how to communicate with those that are deeply affected.
One of the men who lived in the mother and baby home was on radio this morning, and he said he had written to Enda Kenny last year asking him to come to Tuam to visit the mother and baby home, to have it explained to him on that site what has happened there and hear people's experiences. Do you think it would be helpful for the Taoiseach to go visit the site in Galway, for example, or perhaps the Minister for Children?
Well, certainly. I mean, they're practical suggestions, and it would mean a lot, certainly, to the people on the ground. But there's a deeper change necessary. In his speech, which I listened to in the Dáil, and then I read it afterwards, on one level, it's a very heart-rending speech until you actually look at what he's saying. And he actually says, no nuns broke into our homes to kidnap our children. We gave them up to what we convinced ourselves was the nuns' care. We gave them up, maybe to spare them the savagery of gossip, the wink and elbow language of delight, in which the holier-than-thous were particularly fluent, and so on. And I'm saying to myself, what does he mean? I didn't give up anyone, neither did my mother, neither did my aunts. There was a system at the time that between the Bon Secours nuns and other convents throughout the country and the state, who were in absolutely collusion with each other. And if you look, for example, at the Rhine report, which published its report in 2009, one of its recommendations was the congregations need to examine how their ideals became debased by systematic abuse. They must ask themselves how they came to tolerate breaches of their own rules, and when sexual and physical abuse was discovered, how they responded to it. That's just one of the recommendations where Judge Ryan asked the congregations to reflect on what had happened. If we look at a conclusion, and this is where the state comes into it, if you look at the conclusion 6, the deferential and submissive attitude of the Department of Education towards the congregations compromised its ability to carry out its statutory duty of inspection and monitoring of the schools. And this was in relation to the reformatory industrial schools. It says that section of the department was accorded a low status. So why do I mention all of this, Sarah? Because there was active collusion. The state handed over the protection of our most vulnerable to the nuns, to the brothers, the Christian brothers, and so on. And certainly there is great blame attached to those religious orders that certainly weren't acting in a Christian manner. But there's also blame to be attached to successive governments who bowed their knee and toed the cap to the church and said, you do what you want with our children and we'll turn the other eye. We'll give you death certificates when you need them. We won't check the circumstances of the death. We'll give you passports for children when you say they should go to America in the most questionable of circumstances in terms of adoption and so on. So active collusion that the Taoiseach comes nowhere to acknowledging in his reply to Micheál Martin yesterday, or in his reply to me or Mary Lou today. Mary Lou MacDonald.
Finally then, Catherine, why do you think the Taoiseach, in your view, hasn't acknowledged that in what he said yesterday? Do you think it is that he's out of his depth?
You know, in a sense, I think this government, or the new government, has been criticised by various people in the media that it's a paralysed Dáil. I actually think it's a very good Dáil. For the first time, there are new voices questioning and holding the system to account. That some journalists would describe that as paralysis is a reflection on the journalism and the level of journalism. I'm not castigating all journalists by any means. I'm simply making a point.
That's when you hear
this, when you hear this point repeatedly made that it's a paralysed Dáil, that it's going nowhere. I look back on the last year. It's less than a year since the government was formed, and we have queried every single piece of information, every piece of legislation. We have done our work. We've gone into the Dáil prepared. For example, in relation to the case in the southeast of the country that we were talking about today, Deputy Daly, Deputy Wallace have done tremendous Trojan work behind the scenes. In fact, I would say that their work has forced a change in relation to the motion that would have been pushed through had there not been different voices in the Dáil. And so the force of the opposition has forced a change. So if we go back again to why the Taoiseach, why is he? In a sense, I think they're no longer getting away with what they got away with. If you look at what Fine Gael and Labour had when they were in power, they had a fantastic majority and things were just pushed through. The Gillused, that doesn't apply any longer. And our role in opposition is to hold the system to account. I believe that's what's happening, and I believe the Taoiseach is shell-shocked from that.
All right, Catherine Connolly, Independent TD for Galway West, thank you very much for joining us on Newstalk Drive. And very interesting points being made across a range of different issues there by Catherine, Chris.
Yep, absolutely. And I think, honestly, I think Catherine Connolly wounded the Taoiseach today, because I actually, you can see different interactions in the Dáil, and Catherine is extremely learned and extremely impressive, and I think Enda Kenny has a huge amount of respect for her.